friends, Elizabeth here, and I'm so excited to be back with yet another favorites video. I've been loving working my way through all my most read genres, sharing my top 10 favorites with you, so you can get lots of recommendations and get to know my taste, and also so I can coerce you to give me even more recommendations. So we've already talked about fantasy, science fiction, and horror, and now it's time to talk about literary fiction. Now I feel like literary fiction is kind of a nebulous genre. To be fair, I kind of feel every genre is a little bit nebulous. But literary fiction especially is something that for me is so hard to pin down, difficult to define. For me, literary fiction has to do more with the themes and a book that has a purpose of provoking thought and exploring the human condition on a deeper level, more so than telling an exciting or escapist sort of story. I think both types of books have great value, but I definitely lean more toward the former, personally, just my own preference when it comes to the books I read. And so I find that a lot of the contemporary works that I'm drawn to or become 5-star reads for me are books that I would personally classify as literary fiction, just by the nature of them being books that I enjoy and my personal preferences sort of aligning with my own definition of literary fiction, which is so much focused on those themes and that really deep character development. So all that to say, our definitions of literary fiction might vary, and that's why I'm sort of classifying this as an all-encompassing contemporary fiction and literary fiction favorites video, but regardless, all of the books I'm talking about in this video are fantastic and I would highly recommend you read them. So without further ado, let's jump into the 10th book on this list. Oh, actually, I do have one ado, which is to remind you that my patrons get bonus videos after each of these favorites. I share 10 to 15 to 20 or even more favorites in whatever genre I'm talking about, specifically for my patrons at any paid tier level. So if you join my Patreon at any of those 4 paid tiers, you will get access to all of the bonus videos for every genre that I have previously done, and as long as you remain a patron, for any future bonus video. So feel free to join the Patreon with the link in the description box if you want those bonus recommendations. But now, truly, without further ado, let's jump into number 10 on my list. So number 10 on my list was actually also on my best books of 2024 list, so you can check out that video if you missed it, and that is In Tongues by Thomas Grattan. I received this book as an e-arc from the publisher and loved it. I read it voraciously over about a day and a half. I stayed up until I think 3 a.m. that first night, really getting into it. And this is a fantastic book. While the protagonist is solidly an adult in their 20s, it does feel like a coming of age novel, and it is a bit of a late coming of age as our protagonist, who is a gay man, moves to the big city for the first time, sort of leaves everything he knew of the world behind, is recently out of a longer term relationship, and finds his own path and new relationships and grows as a person, is faced with his own flaws and is forced to really interrogate them and tease them apart and try to grow and change so he can hold on to some of these really important relationships that he develops. And we follow him as he explores different facets of the queer community in New York City and his own experiences as a gay man. He is a really flawed, complex, fascinating protagonist who does not always make the right choice. His fatal flaw really is his selfishness, and that is what he has to face most fervently over the course of the novel to really grow into the next better version of himself. And in this novel, our protagonist Gordon, who is 24, is hired as a dog walker for a wealthy gay couple who own an art gallery in the city. And as he becomes more and more embroiled in their community of wealthy gay art enthusiasts, he finds that his natural flaws are challenged even further, and he really has to face what it is that he values in his life and what kind of person he wants to be. And there are some really surprising relationships that develop in this novel that you might not expect going into it. Some really incredible, complex, platonic relationships, some lovely friendships that I really appreciated. And while this novel is predominantly, in my mind, a coming-of-age story and that personal journey, it also touches on other themes, including complex relationships between parents and their children, and especially the father-son relationship. And in this case, that's further complicated by the fact that Gordon is gay and his father is religious. And there there is that tension. And this book also dives into wealth inequality and complicated dynamics between employees and employers and a misuse of the power that an employer has over an employee, especially when they come from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So anyway, I really loved this book. I am maybe making it sound boring, but it's not boring. It is largely very quiet and very slice of life and very day by day. It doesn't have, huge, exciting, intense twists, but there is just something about this book that felt so naturalistic, so real, so vulnerable and raw, and really touched me on a deep level. And I really loved watching Gordon go through that journey and have that realization that he needed to make a change, to be the kind of person that he wanted to be the kind of person that he would respect if he met himself. And I think that's the kind of maybe more subtle character growth that I don't always see explored in literature, but is important and very relatable, I think, for a lot of people. So I would definitely check out In Tongues if you haven't already. It is heartbreaking at moments and starkly beautiful in many others, and I really loved it. All right, so moving on to number 9 on this list, but before I start talking about it, I'm going to have to do something about my energy levels. I feel that I am low energy right now. I did not sleep well last night. What's new? I always sleep terribly. But last night in particular, I was tossing and turning and woke up a bunch of times. So I'm feeling a bit of that afternoon slump situation. Luckily, I have the perfect solution on hand. Magic Mind and their brand new gummies. I don't know if it's just me, let me know in the comments if you feel the same way, but there's something about a gummy that brings back all of my childlike wonder. Today's video is kindly sponsored by Magic Mind and their brand new mental performance gummies. These are a new gummy version of Magic Mind's famous and much beloved by many people around the world, but also by me and my household, mental performance shot. I've talked about Magic Mind and their mental performance shot on my channel so many times at this point. I feel like y'all already know how much love I have for the shot, both because it is absolutely delicious and a treat every single morning, but also because I genuinely feel it helps me to feel more energetic, feel more awake and focused, and to maintain a more steady energy level through the entire day. But the mental performance shot does have some caffeine. So if I forget to take it early in the day, or if I sleep in, then I tend to not take it because I don't want to interrupt my sleep even further. Because like I said, my sleep is terrible. As a baseline. So that's why I'm so excited about Magic Mind's new mental performance gummies, because they are caffeine free, meaning I could take them at any time of the day and support my energy without any risk of caffeine interfering with my sleep. One bag of Magic Mind gummies is a full month supply of servings for an adult. You can take 3 a day for a whole month with the 90 gummies that come in this pack, which is amazing value. And they're not tiny gummies either. These are nice sized gummies that you can really chew and enjoy. And I love the green apple flavor. It's a very natural green apple flavor, and it definitely adds to that nostalgia factor because I loved apple juice as a kid, and this tastes like my best happy memory of a cold, refreshing glass of apple juice on a summer's day when I was 7 years old. It's amazing. Especially as a night owl and someone who tends to work later in the day, I can already tell that these are going to become such an important part of my routine, just like the Magic Mind shot is in the morning. These are going to be my companion through the afternoon and evening hours. A single serving of the gummies is 3 a day for ages 17 and up, 2 a day for 13 to 17-year-olds, and 1 a day for 8 to 12-year-olds. Magic Mind relies on over 200 peer-reviewed studies on the ingredients within its formulations. Magic Mind is 100% safe, with every ingredient being third-party tested and sourced from the best suppliers. And Magic Mind is risk-free to try. You have 100 days for a 100% refund. Because Magic Mind is sponsoring this video and they're so excited about the launch of their gummies, you can click the link in my description box or use the QR code to get 25% off your order. That's 25% off Magic Mind's brand new gummies with the QR code or the link in my description box. Thank you so much to Magic Mind for sponsoring this video, and thank you for making a delicious gummy form of your shots that are caffeine-free that I can use to get me through those late night editing sessions. Okay, I've had a gummy, I'm feeling a little more energetic. It's time to move on to number 9 on this list, which is Enter Ghost by Isabella Hammad. This is another one that was on my top 12 favorite books of 2024 list. Again, you can check out that video if you missed it. This book follows a Palestinian British actress who has not visited the West Bank for many, many years, who returns to visit her sister and gets pulled into a production of Hamlet and is really embroiled in and immersed in the experience of living in the West Bank as a Palestinian in the modern day, what that experience is like, and develops some beautiful friendships and relationships with her fellow cast members, and comes to understand some harrowing childhood experiences in the West Bank that she was not fully able to process when they happened. And I just thought this was a beautiful book. It is so perfect for me on so many levels. I feel like I've talked about it a million times since I finished it on this channel because I just think it's so great. And as someone who is a lover of theater, has a degree in theater, has been a fan of Shakespeare for as long as I can remember, and Hamlet is one of my favorites of his plays, watching the process of casting for and rehearsing and performing this play within the context of the political and social situation on the West Bank is just, it was beautiful. I loved it so much. I could relate so much to many of the ways that the experience of the cast of a play becoming like a family, that was so well portrayed and felt so real and relatable to me, but it also drew me into the experience of Palestinians. And Sonia is our conduit to that because she is somewhat of an outsider. She has never lived full-time in Palestine. And so she is having her eyes open to the situation. She is understanding it on a whole new level. And we are learning that with her. It is very accessible and yet incredibly vulnerable and raw and real. It does not pull punches when it comes to its characters and their complexities and their flaws or the political situation in Palestine. It is a beautiful story of the ways that theater can bring us together and dives into themes of identity and displacement, colonialism, political oppression, personal and collective memory, family and community, the power of art and storytelling as resistance. And it's sort of a layered thing because the book itself is also a form of resistance. So I would highly recommend Enter Ghost if any of that sounds interesting to you. This is a very subtle yet nuanced and profound story that has touched me deeply and has really stayed with me very vividly ever since I finished it. So this is number 9 on my list. Moving on to number 8 on my list, which is The Longcut by Emily Hall. This is one of the books that I read for my WeirdLit reading vlog. I'll link that if you missed it. And I believe this was also on my top 12 favorites of the year, if I'm not misremembering. Probably gonna be a lot of those on this list. This one is just, again, maybe just the perfect book for me in so many ways. It has a really experimental, wacky style. It is basically told in just a few very long run-on sentences, and it has a bit of a frantic, frenetic, circuitous writing style that has the ability to make you as the reader feel as obsessive and frantic and stressed as the main character feels. You are really in the protagonist's mind in this book, and her mind, for better or worse, reminds me a lot of my own mind, which is part of why I like this book so much. I feel like if you are the kind of person who has racing thoughts, whether it's from, anxiety and overthinking in general, if you're a worrier, or maybe you have ADHD like I do, this might be a very relatable book for you. I don't know if I've ever read a book that felt so accurate to the way my brain works, and it is a bit exhausting at times. Both my actual brain and reading someone else's brain working that way. But this book is so worth it. At least I thought so. I thought it was such a unique experience. It was a bit of a marathon. It felt like I really exerted myself getting through it, even though it's super short. It is a bit of a satire and a commentary on the pretension and overthinking and obsession that can come with being an artist, being a creative, the ways that we question our own status as an artist or a writer or a creator, whatever kind you are, and the ways that we really overthink and dissect our own work to the point that we can't even identify what is art anymore. It just becomes this philosophical gobbledygook of pretension and confusion and over-analysis and self-absorption. And I just felt like this book did such a great job of really teasing apart both the really raw, vulnerable, earnest quality that can have when you are just genuinely so passionate about your art and so invested in it that you really do dive headfirst and get sort of an obsessive quality about you, but also the fact that it can so easily cross over into meaningless word salad, just that over-analysis to the point of meaninglessness, and it is kind of hilarious and ridiculous and silly and really drives home the point. So I thought this was really fantastic. If you are a creative, if you're an artist, if you're a writer, I think you might relate to this book. and find it's a bit of a entertaining romp that makes you look a little deeper into yourself and recognize in what ways you maybe can relate to the main character and can maybe chill a little bit on the, obsession with the importance and the value of your work and over analyzing it and trying to over define it and just make stuff. Because if you overthink forever and you never start, then you are in fact not an artist because you're not making anything. So I really loved this. I thought, like I said, very relatable to me on many levels. Funny, satirical, silly, experimental writing style. It's fun, it's interesting, it made me think, and it's been on my mind ever since I finished it. I feel like this lands very solidly into what most people would define as literary fiction, and it does it with a silly abandon in a way that I really love. So that's The Longcut by Emily Hall. And now for something completely different, we have number 7 on my list, The Yield by Tara June Winch. This is a book by an Indigenous Australian author, and it is looking into the experience of Indigenous people in a variety of times, both modern and looking into history. And it jumps between timelines of our protagonist and her grandfather's experiences. And this is a book that made me feel so many feelings. It made me cry so much. I was very touched emotionally by this book. I was so engaged and immersed and drawn in. I loved the modern day and the historical settings equally, which I think is very difficult to do. And I felt like Winch did a great job of balancing the two. I was always left wanting a little bit more from whichever timeline we're leaving to go to the next, but within a few sentences, I was completely drawn in to whatever timeline we had moved into and was fully invested until the moment that we switched back. The characters felt so vivid and were so lovable. I cared so much about them. I was very invested in their stories. And I loved the themes that this book was exploring of Indigenous identity and resilience, of memory, cultural identity, and the difficulty that is attempting to uphold and honor your culture as you are expected to, and in some cases forced to, assimilate into a colonizing culture. It also examines intergenerational trauma and environmental destruction and activism and resistance, as well as reconciliation. And while this is an Indigenous Australian story, there are so many common themes that can really be taken to heart. And this was told with so much heart and so much love of culture and family, and I'm getting choked up just talking about it because it made me so deeply emotional. It is a beautiful, beautiful book that I highly recommend. Moving on to number 6 on this list, which is Luster by Raven Leilani. This is such an interesting book. This is really the story of a very complex, very layered and flawed protagonist who is also an artist. There might be a bit of a theme in some of my favorite books. There's a lot of art and theater and creativity, but our protagonist is working in a publishing house and not having a great time, and also involved in a pretty toxic relationship as the girlfriend of a man who is in an open relationship with his wife. There are some complex dynamics at play because she is quite a bit younger than him. She is not as financially secure as him, and she's also Black while he is white. And all of those factors come into play in their relationship. It is a very intersectional look at this kind of a power dynamic, and our protagonist Edie is so much fun to follow. It is so interesting to be in her mind because she is deeply complex. This is such a vulnerable story. She has her own complex backstory that we learn a little bit about that explains some of her current relationship dynamics, but also her experience at work. She has this really dry, observant humor that pops up through the whole book that I found absolutely hilarious. She does not pull punches with her observations and her opinions, and she's also a visual artist, and she has been severed from her creativity somewhat. She has struggled to continue to paint, and throughout the course of the novel, we follow her as she starts to find that passion and the inspiration to paint again. And it's not always from a positive, happy, motivated place. It is also from a place of exploring and untangling and healing from pain, both long past and more recent. I just felt like this was such a unique book. I read it for my Female Rage video that I did ages ago, but I'll link it if you want to watch it. And this one really took me by surprise, and it's a book that I have continued to think about for years. It just comes back to me constantly. Edie is such a vivid character. I feel like I know her in real life. She really jumps off the page, and the writing is beautiful. It is both cutting and funny and dry, but it also has so many moments of profound beauty and just this deep appreciation for life and art and the human experience in all its complicated, gooey messiness. And the relationships in this book are not simple at all. There are so many dynamics at play, and I feel like Raven Leilani did such a beautiful job of balancing them all and telling this story in a way that feels so genuine and real. Like I said, has really stayed with me for years. It is a book that I constantly come back to and constantly think about, and I really, really, really recommend it to anyone who is interested in female rage stories, in really complex, realistic protagonists looking into relationships that are interracial, interclass, with that wealth disparity and the power imbalance. There's a lot to untangle here, but my absolute favorite parts were, sorry, Yoda's using the litter box. So, pause for peeing. They have 2 other litter boxes that are not in my filming space, but they really like to use the one where I am, I guess so I can watch their back, which is fair, but she's being very thorough in covering it up. I'm gonna lose my train of thought. I already have. I've already lost my train of thought. You're still going? She's staring into my soul. Okay, are you all done? Good job. Okay, bye. Anyways, I lost my train of thought, but this is very, very good and I highly recommend it. Next up, number 5 on my list was a book club pick a while back for my book club on Patreon, which you can join with the link in the description box. And that was Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson, who is a Canadian Indigenous author. And she's quite a well-known author in Canada with many best-selling books. And this was my first foray into her work, and I absolutely fell in love. Monkey Beach is close to being historical fiction in that it was published in the year 2000 and is set in the 80s or 90s, but I feel like it is set in recent enough times and the themes are still so deeply relevant. I think it's also hard to classify something as historical fiction that is set in a time that I was alive because I don't feel old enough for the decade of my birth to be classified as historical fiction. But anyway, this is a beautiful story that is firmly entrenched in family and community. This takes place in British Columbia, and our protagonist's brother has gone missing, and she is doing everything she can to find him. And the journey is both harrowing in a realistic sense, in a traveling long distances and facing incredible odds sort of way, but it also has an element of magical realism or a spiritual journey, and involves her remembering and connecting to her cultural identity in a way that she hasn't maybe before on quite that deep of a level. This book focuses specifically on Haisla culture, and I felt that Eden Robinson did such a beautiful job of introducing the reader to their culture and cultural practices and beliefs. It felt very inclusive and welcoming without over-explaining or trying to pander to an outside audience. It felt like it struck such a beautiful balance, and the characters are so beautifully drawn, both our protagonist but also other family members who are sort of in the periphery of this story, and sort of similar to some of the other books I've talked about already, that the characters felt like people I knew in real life. They jumped off the page. They felt so fully realized and three-dimensional, and their relationships were complicated and messy and toxic at times and difficult at times, but that's what family is like. That's what relationships are like in real life, and it just is so beautifully portrayed in this book. We're exploring the protagonist's Indigenous heritage and a cultural memory, but it's also such a close-knit, quiet story of one particular family and the really deep ties that bind them together. And I just felt it was so beautiful. I'm gonna get emotional again, sorry, but I cried a lot reading this one as well. I felt like the familial relationships were so beautifully portrayed in a way that really hit home for me. The sibling relationship was really profound and really beautiful to me. I don't have a brother, but I do have a sister, and I do feel that there is something so uniquely beautiful and complicated and messy and lovely and important about sibling relationships, and I really feel like this book portrayed that beautifully. It also has some other familial relationships that are very important and very profound for our protagonist, and really dives into the experiences of this particular community in this particular time and place, and the challenges that they face, and also the joys and the beauty of their experience, and in the ways that they view the world. There is also a little bit of a supernatural element here that I thought was a really beautiful addition to this story and gave the entire narrative a bit more of a dreamlike quality that really adds to that feeling that the whole experience is one long dream, one long journey, and it feels almost disconnected from reality like a dream. It is a profound and touching story, and I would highly recommend it. Moving on to number 4 on my list, which is another book I read in my WeirdLit reading vlog, which is The Weak Spot by Lucy Elvin. This is another strange book, again, as you might infer from being included in a WeirdLit reading vlog. This one also has a very dreamy, hazy, surreal sort of quality to it, and a bit of an experimental writing style. It is very sparse and vague in its storytelling, but very intentionally so. I think the way I have described it every time I talk about this book is that it is very spaced out. The storytelling leaves a lot of empty space to be filled by your own perceptions and your own interpretation and your own experiences as the reader. And it turns into this really collaborative experience where Lucy Elvin is telling a story and she has a perspective, and the story has, you know, its own themes and plot and characters and intention, but you as the reader can fill in those spaces and become part of the story on a more profound level than a book that is more elaborate or detailed or prescriptive. And I really loved the experience of reading this book. It draws you in and it is very immersive. It almost put me in a trance at times. It has this very eerie, unsettling atmosphere, and you slowly start to piece things together and start to wonder what is really happening in this small mountain town. And it doesn't seem good. Our protagonist has moved to this town to be an intern at a pharmacy, to become a pharmacist, and there are a lot of weird things happening. This town is very insular. It has its own mysteries and secrets, and our protagonist is starting to develop these relationships with the people around her and starting to integrate into the community, but constantly feels like there's a wall up and there's something she doesn't quite understand or doesn't quite grasp about this community and their dynamic. And the themes here have a lot to do with power dynamics and power disparities, influence and manipulation, interpretation and memory, as well as identity, and maybe most importantly, autonomy. I found this book to be very profound and a very unique and memorable experience. Again, it's one of those books that has just really stayed with me since I finished it. I think about it a lot. It is very evocative and has a very, very, very strong sense of place. I can envision what the pharmacy looks like and what the town square looks like and what the mountain looks like. Everything is so vivid in my mind, despite the prose being more sparse and pared back. It's a really unique, very interesting experience, and I don't think I've ever read anything quite like it. So I would highly recommend The Weak Spot, especially if you're into WeirdLit. And now we've made it to the top 3 on my list. And as per usual, the top 3 on my list are neck and neck. Some of my favorite books. It is very hard to pick between them. I hate having to choose favorites from amongst my favorites. It is very difficult for me. But this is my loose, up for debate ranking for my top 3. So number 3 on my list is On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This was another one of our book club picks in my Patreon book club. And this is gorgeous. This has a very poetic writing style, and it's a coming of age story for a young gay boy, and is very much focused on his incredibly complicated and at times contentious and toxic relationship with his mother. It's written as a letter to his mother, and it is absolutely heartbreaking, and it ties so deeply into coming of age and discovering yourself, your identity, your sexuality, sexual exploration, and that growth from child to adult, and in the ways that that growth can really put pressure and tension on parent-child dynamics. It also examines class and race and the immigrant experience from a Vietnamese American perspective. And like I said, it's written like poetry. It is absolutely beautiful and heartbreaking. The sorrow is palpable as you read this book. You can tell how much this protagonist wants to find an understanding with his mother and wants to connect and have that unconditional love and support that he is craving, and knowing that it is very unlikely that he's going to receive that. And so there is that pain, but it's also so beautifully told, and it is just a complete journey. It is so immersive. It is so engaging. It is such a gut punch in terms of its exploration of generational trauma, and it's just a gorgeous, gorgeous book that profoundly touched me. And it's one of those books that I finished and I felt like I would never quite be the same. So if you have not tried anything by Ocean Vuong, if you have not read this book, please pick it up. It is so worth your time. It is absolutely beautiful. Number 2 on my list is a collection of short stories, and I was initially not going to include this on any of my main lists. I was going to save it for a sort of bonus favorites of short stories and short story collections. But I changed my mind and decided it was too much of a favorite to be left behind, and it straddles the line pretty equally between horror and literary fiction. And since I already made my horror list, it had to be very high up on my literary fiction list, and that is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. I'm obsessed with this collection. This profoundly changed who I am as a human being. I think it altered my DNA. This is a collection of short stories that are all from a female or feminist perspective. Many of the stories have queer protagonists and are looking at the queer female experience. Many of the stories have a horror element to them and are using horror, like I talked about in the horror favorites video. I won't delve into it too much, but using horror, like I explained in that video, as a vehicle to explore its themes and to really deliver this visceral, raw gut punch with that thematic material and drive it home on a much more visceral, much more intense level for the reader. This is a stunning work. It is genre bending. It is so deeply feminist, and it really explores the many facets of the female experience, and especially the queer female experience, the trauma and the difficulty and the pain, but also the joy and the beauty. This is a book that really dives into sexuality and gender, bodily autonomy, queerness, and existing in society as an other, or as a woman that does not fully live up to society's expectations of what a woman should be, of pushing the boundaries of gender and gender expression. And it's profound. And these stories, again, I have thought about them so many times since finishing. I often find myself thinking about one of the many stories in this collection or dreaming about them. It has burrowed its way into my brain and sprouted there. And as a woman and as a queer person, this work makes me feel incredibly seen. And I would highly recommend it if you have somehow not read this yet. And with that, we've come to number 1 on my list, which was in my top 3 favorite reads of 2024, and that is There by Tommy Orange. I've talked about this book so much since finishing it. This was another book club pick for our Patreon book club in August, I think, of 2024, and this book is about urban Indians, the indigenous population of Oakland in the US, and it jumps between many different perspectives, many different points of view, and all these different experiences, the multifaceted experiences of being an urban Indian and what that means, the unique challenges of existing as an Indigenous person in an urban environment in a city, generational trauma, assimilation, resilience, family, and connection. It is a long game of a book. It has many threads that seem disparate until they come together in such a perfect and absolutely devastating way in the end. The end of this book had me glued to the pages and frantically reading, so invested and so needing to know that all the characters, every single one who I had fallen in love with over the course of the book, were going to be okay. And it was terrifying and vivid and harrowing and intense, and was such a perfect, heartbreaking, and yet beautiful culmination of all of the different character arcs, all the different stories, all the characters coming together in this one place in time. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. It's such a gorgeous book. It is so masterfully done. It is so visceral. and real and grounded in reality and vulnerable and complicated, and tells this story in such an expansive way. Tommy Orange could have easily chosen to write a much simpler story focusing on 1 or 2 or even 3 points of view, but he decided to write this story that is inherently a story of community. It tells so many different stories and it does it incredibly well, and it's another book that I feel changed me from reading it. It's gorgeous. Highly recommend if you have not tried Tommy Orange. If you are looking to learn more of the urban Indian, the modern Indigenous experience, I would highly recommend picking this up. It is one of my favorite books of 2024 and my favorite literary fiction read of all time. And with that, we've come to the end of this video. Those are my 10 favorite literary fiction reads of the last several years. I think a pretty good variety of experiences and perspectives and writing styles, and hopefully there is something for you within these top 10s and something has caught your eye and you're gonna add it to your TBR. If so, I would love to know what you're picking up. Please tell me in the comments. I think my favorite thing about making these videos is hearing which books you are going to pick up after hearing me rave about them. It makes me very excited and giddy, so please share. And of course, if in watching this video a book came to mind that you wanted to recommend to me, please let me know in the comments. I am always looking for more books to absolutely devastate me and then rebuild me from the ashes into a brand new person. So feel free to recommend all of your weird lit, your experimental fiction, your literary fiction, and stories that are deeply focused on their themes and their characters. That is something I absolutely love in all the fiction I read and is maybe distilled to its purest, most essential form when it comes to literary fiction. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as you have enjoyed the past genres that I've covered. If you missed those, I'll link the playlist so you can watch all my favorites. If you want even more literary fiction favorites, join my Patreon with the link in the description box at any of the 4 paid tiers. I believe I have at least 10 more favorites, probably more, but I know for sure at least 10. So definitely check that out if you want more recommendations. And thank you again to Magic Mind for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to click the link in my description box or use the QR code to get 25% off your purchase of Magic Mind gummies. Speaking of their gummies, I'm gonna take another one because I have the whole Patreon bonus video to film now, and it's starting to get dark out, it's starting to get late. I feel like at this point every day I start to get a bit tired and don't want to be on camera anymore, so I need a little pep in my step. And they're so tasty. Like they're sweet, but not overly fake sweet. And they're so fresh. Oh, I wish I could eat them all at once, but I'm not going to. But that's it from me. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to turn on notifications if you want to be notified every time I post a new favorites video or any of the other bookish videos that I'm posting very regularly on this channel. And with that, I'm gonna get going. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye friends.